You're tuned into the Zealous Podcast. I'm your host, Rocky Snyder. This week, David Gray is with me. He is a movement specialist and physio for the most part. David Gray Rehab, CEO and founder of the podcast as well by the same name. We're going to get underway, but before that, remember, Setanta College for a Master's of Science in Applied Sports Biomechanics and Movement Science, Applied Sport and Exercise Psychology, Performance Coaching, and Sports Injury and Return to Performance Management. Go to setantacollege.com, enter the code RS10, RS10 for 10% off tuition today. If you're looking for continuing education, perhaps you're an athletic trainer, maybe a strength coach, physical therapist, or chiropractor, go to rockysnyder.com, my website. We've got continuing education workshops that are being scheduled for the upcoming year, as well as online courses. In fact, in-person courses this November on the 3rd in Santa Cruz, California. We'll be doing posture-based soft tissue mobilization workshop, and it is a CEU course for all of the mentioned. Meanwhile, after that, follow us on Instagram at Rocky_Snyder, and here we go. Very nice to meet you, first of all. Thanks for agreeing to come on. I know how busy schedules can be.
No, thanks for having me, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And I've been listening to several of your podcasts. I guess first, congratulations on your family.
Thank you.
And
thank you very much.
And how old is your baby now?
He is 5 months old. So we are kind of starting to get into a more clear mindset, I would say, at this stage. It was probably 3 months of just not having a clue what we were doing, and it's been a little bit better over the last while for several reasons. We got a little bit more help, we have a little bit more knowledge of what we're doing, and we just got to know him a bit better. So
certainly, yeah. Now, do you have extended family around to help, like grandparents?
Some, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, which is very important for us. Yeah.
Excellent.
What about you? Do you have kids?
I do. I have 2 kids. They're growing pretty fast. My daughter is in her master's program for athletic training. She's in her first year, so she's got an additional year to go before she gets her master's. And then my son will be finishing high school this fall or this winter, and then he enters into an emergency medical technician or EMT program at the local junior college. So right now he's a lifeguard here in Santa Cruz and an avid surfer. And my daughter is just finished her college lacrosse career and is enjoying her master's. So yeah,
exciting times.
It always is. Yeah. With more to come. And now, with your business, you've got a lot of online products and programs, but you see people all over. Do you do Zoom sessions with patients?
Yeah, we have a mix of online coaching and in-person coaching, and a hybrid offer where we work with people who. So, for example, this week I have a girl who's a sprinter from Switzerland, and I've been working with her online. Actually, sorry, she traveled first to me, did 2 days together, and then she has been working with me maybe online for 8 weeks or so, and now she's back this week again for 4 days of rehab. So yeah, that's kind of it's just a mix of stuff. Then we have like our DIY programs and stuff, but for our coaching side of things, it's either online or in person or a hybrid.
Yeah. And how many hours a week do you typically see clients?
Good question. I'm trying to see less and less, Rocky. I have, who do I have? I have Mimi, who's one of our physios with us, and then I have Alice, who's another physio, and Chris, who's one of our coaches. So I'm trying to see less. I always want to coach. I always want to make sure I'm staying on top of that, and that's how I learn the most, to be honest, is just working with people. But I'd say probably this week I have less than 10 sessions with people, which is about an hour a session.
That's not bad.
Yeah, actually maybe even more closer to 5 or 6 hours this week, but other weeks would probably be closer to probably 10 hours.
How many workshops do you typically teach a year?
Last year I did 12, one a month, and then this year I've done maybe 5 or so, and that would be.
Are they local, or how far do you travel for your workshops?
All over. Yeah. So we were in the States last year. We did one in New York and one in DC. We did three in Australia, and then the rest were just around Europe.
I'm curious, how do you set them up, just from a business perspective?
We go, it depends. There's a couple of different setups. The one that we did in London this year, so we just hired their gym. We had no relationship with them whatsoever, really, and we just asked them. Someone recommended this is a good space. Just hired the space. We sell the tickets ourselves. I did one in Germany a couple of weeks ago, and that was an in-house workshop for their staff. So we just charge a fee for that 2 days. And then we have done a couple of like revenue splits in the past with people where they help us. But as our brand gets a little bit more, as we get our like bigger email list and stuff like that, we're more interested in just hiring the space, or else someone hosts us and we'll give them a few free tickets for them and their staff as well. And we're able to sell the tickets.
Your growth is quite impressive. I mean, over the last, say, 3 or 4 years, especially. We don't have to talk business all at once. I'd love to talk about your background and the different disciplines that you pursued over the course of the time that 10 years or whatever. But you've really come on the scene with some great content, great products, and a lot of social media. I'm sure that has a lot to do with your growth. Is it?
It definitely does. Social media for us is a chance to like showcase the work and just share it out. And we post a lot. If anyone sees our social media, like we just post sessions with clients, like a clip from a session with a client. That's what I'll do today. I was on the track with that girl I'm telling you about with the foot problem, and I'll just post a clip from either like a combination of clips or just one clip of me coaching an exercise or something like that. So it's very the kind of real. It's not super duper curated, and it just shows us, me and our coaches, working with people and different types of posts. Some of them are educational, some of them are more hopefully fun, or some of them are whatever. But regardless, our business will continue to grow in an ethical way and in a helpful way for people if we do social media. And that's what I tell anyone that I talk to on the business side of it. You don't have to do social media. You can build a nice local business yourself quite easily with word of mouth and with word of mouth basically, and having a good shop front or whatever. But there's huge opportunities for people online, I think, and if people are interested in that, then why not do it?
So your path is fairly typical of most physios, and what I mean by that is that you yourself suffered from some injuries early in your athletic career. You were maybe enthusiastic about the care that you received, or quite the opposite. You were disenfranchised or disenchanted by the approaches that were taken that were ineffective, and then started to pursue a path of knowledge. Am I on the right track there?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, that seems to be the way people go about it. It's like get injured, get frustrated, try and figure it out for yourself, realize that maybe you can, maybe you can't, maybe you need help from other smart people along the way, and then eventually when you have a certain level of knowledge, you start helping other people, and then you forget about yourself for a while, and you get kind of fat and lazy, or maybe not fat and lazy, but maybe you just don't care about your body for a while. That seems to be how it goes in the S&C world, or the physio world, or the rehab world. And then I'm kind of coming back around now again, where I'm trying to look after myself a little bit again. So that's been a interesting cycle for me, where I'm sure that will happen
told
again.
My path.
It seems to be a common one. It seems to be a very common one. And I think it's a fun one. It's a fun ride. It's a frustrating one at times, but I think it's the way you learn. It's certainly the way I learn the most, to be honest.
So what was your initial insult?
I had a really bad knee injury. I had a pretty bad patellar tendinopathy for a long time. I was always pretty good at sports, but I was never the best mover. I could, like, figure out things. I could get the job done. I could learn skills relatively quickly, but I was never the fastest guy or the guy that could jump the most or run the furthest or any of those things. I was okay at all of those things, but not that good. And I developed a really, really bad patellar tendinopathy that basically plagued my life for many years. I would not go for a walk with my girlfriend because I had a game to play that night or the next day or something like that. I was like trying to count my, like, this is the amount of exertion I can handle. So I need to save myself for this game or this training session. And I think as a result of developing a very chronic knee pain, my mechanics started to compensate and develop around that, and I had a lot of compensatory or substitution movements, and I developed a pretty bad Achilles tendinopathy as a result of that, or I think as a result of that, partly as a result of that, and it's just some hip issues and different issues like that. And I, yeah, ultimately the knee was the thing that stopped me playing sport. For a period of time at least, and ultimately actually I moved countries. I emigrated to Australia to stop playing sport in Ireland because I could, because I think sometimes a leg break or a traumatic injury can be can be better than a tendinopathy, or even an
Sure.
ACL injury sometimes can be better than a nasty tendinopathy, because a tendinopathy is like, it tends to linger a lot more. There's not a defined, okay, this is the start point and this is the end point. So I just couldn't seem to get over that tendinopathy. I couldn't seem to make it better. And
And when you look back, was there some kind of cause and effect to that aside from the repetitive actions that you were doing? Like, because we both are have foot fetishes, shall we say, and we're really interested in the mechanics of the whole body, but it just didn't wake up one day, the knee that is, and begin just to kick in. So have you pursued that, or you just at that point you're like, you know what, I'm going to pursue knowledge and deal with the knee as a whole integrative unit? I mean,
no, I have. For me, it was a little bit easier. So I actually had a bike accident. I fell off a motorbike,
uh,
and I bashed my knee on the ground,
mm,
and I continued to play sport after that, even though the knee was not fully healed. And that was a mistake, but
got it.
that in and of itself wouldn't have necessarily developed. You would think that that would help you, or that would be potentially cause more like just anterior knee pain or patellofemoral pain, but actually, I think that 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 fall caused a lot. I think it altered my mechanics. Number one, where I wasn't flexing my knee very much. I was maybe avoiding that and running a little bit stiffer through that area. And number two, I think it caused a lot of inhibition around my quadriceps, where I just wasn't really happy to load them for whatever reason. That trauma, my brain kind of held on to it. And I think a combination of those things plus just training as hard or harder than I had before, I think that's definitely what caused that for me. And that's why I think some of the treatments that I received over the years were so, looking back, so poor, and not in a, I've come to the realization that like people were doing their best, physios and doctors and surgeons that I met, they were for the most part doing their best. They're just, even 10, 11 years ago, there just wasn't, 12 years ago, it probably was, there just wasn't as much knowledge around as there is now. And that's why I get frustrated when I hear people talking about how the industry just goes in circles. Like it does, but also we are getting better as an industry. Our average is improving, I think, significantly. So, you hear lots of people saying, well, that exercise was done 100 years ago. So that means the industry isn't improving because they did all them exercises then. Well, I don't think that's the point. I think it's the explanations behind why and when and how to do certain things, and for what population to do certain things, that's where we're improving, and we can be much more accurate with our assessments now and our prescriptions for exercises. So yeah, looking back, I just wasn't given the right things. And I think even now, if I went to the average physio or the average coach, I'd probably be helped much more now than I was back then.
I agree. I think that the information, the knowledge and experience has grown tremendously, like you say, in the last 10 years, especially with and it's slow to trickle into perhaps the world of academia, but you've got fellows like yourself and others out there, whether it's Dr. Gary Gray or Gary Ward or other individuals that are kind of just pulling the curtain away from the antiquated approach, the symptom-based approach that was basically created for war veterans after World War II, and taking a different kind of model that is more comprehensive and in its approach to understand cause and effect of different areas and the compensatory patterns that emerge, so that a knee problem is actually a knee solution that has become problematic because the proper way of solving the problem hasn't been integrated back into their bodies. So with that, where was your path of knowledge that, say, 10, 12 years ago? Where did you initiate this path of learning outside of getting your physio degree?
I actually didn't get a physio degree, so I went in. I will answer your question, but I did a kind of half-arsed physio type of degree in Ireland. It's like a neuromuscular physical therapy. So that's another story. But in terms of, that's definitely not where I got the most of the knowledge that I use today anyway, regardless. But yeah, I had a very varied learning experience. I had a history in like S&C anyway, where I had just good coaches over the years that were into field-based training and a little bit of gym-based stuff. So that kind of came naturally to me. I first kind of, when I went into the non-traditional type of methods, I started learning from Ido Portal. And when I think I was 21, I'm 34 now. That was 13 years ago. I flew to Amsterdam to one of his seminars.
Nice.
Purely to try and figure out my own knee pain at the time. And he was like someone who had done some clips on YouTube, and I couldn't believe that someone could move in this way. He went on to become famous through working with Conor McGregor and different things like that. But this was even several years before that. And I was definitely the worst person in the room at that seminar in terms of movement. Now, probably I could play sports, I could play field sports better than most of the other people, but just in terms of general physical qualities, in terms of like a little bit of flexibility and control and just moving their bodies around, these people were way, way ahead of me. And I actually don't use a whole lot now of what I learned back then, but what I will give Ido a lot of credit for, and that community a lot of credit for, is it just kind of opened my eyes up to movement in general, how cool it can be, and how strong people can get through just doing lots of different stuff. There's no one right thing. There's just so many options out there. So yeah, Ido kind of opened my worldview in that regard, and that has been very important. And I think that's missed sometimes from people who go to seminars and they come back years later and they say, oh, I don't use anything from that seminar anymore. But often, if you actually look at the path, I'm like, I can kind of see how that drove you to this next thing and this next thing, and you should be appreciative of where you were at the time and how that did help you. So Ido was a huge influence on me. Gary Ward was a big influence on me. People like Gary Gray as well that you mentioned. People like PRI. Again, I actually have like lots of issues with how they do things, to be honest, but I try my best to focus more on the positives of what I learned around the asymmetries in the human body, not looking at that as like a disability, but just as a little bit of a fact of life that human beings aren't symmetrical. The importance of breathing, and the importance of sense, and how your body makes sense of the world, and how your nervous system makes sense of the world around you. So PRI was very important in that regard for me. And then there was other kind of weird stuff along the way where I dived into some stretching worlds and Chinese martial arts world, and actually learned lots there too.
Yeah. Okay. So I think we've followed parallel paths in many ways, pursuing knowledge in terms of movement anywhere we can get it, whether it's motor neurology, understanding the brain's interplay with the physical frame, or if it's utilizing anatomy and motion wedges to initiate movement up the chain, Gary Gray, PRI, all these different elements. So with that, your toolbox is quite large, and it's almost like an auto mechanic where it's on wheels, and you've got several drawers in which to pull out and grab the right tools when you're working with an individual. How do you sort through that? Have you ever stopped and thought about that? Like, because I think that along this path, we become, in some ways, a purist when we find something that works really well and we try to hammer that into everyone's situation. And then there comes a realization that there's a time where you're going, you know what? Those things that I had learned in the past actually apply better right now than what I'm trying to do here. And then you realize that, I should open up all the drawers in this toolbox and not lock other ones away just because that I got them so long ago. So do you see what I'm saying? Like, you've got so many tools from what you've already labeled. How do you sort through it during your assessments with people? Because I'm curious myself. When I do it, it's just almost instinctive, but there's something underlying it. Do you feel the same way?
100%. Yeah, I've had to reflect on this a lot more recently because of having staff members
Yeah.
and because of teaching other people. So I can't just stand in a session and I have a physio that I'm training up and they say like, why did you do that thing? And I just say, I don't know.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
yeah. So yeah, I've had this conversation quite a bit and I don't have a good answer. I really don't. But I spoke about it at one of our workshops recently, and I said, I actually don't want you to walk away from our workshop and say, that's another tool in the toolbox, because I see a lot of people going around to the next seminar and the next system collecting tools. And I do think that's a good thing, exposing yourself to all of these different systems and places and wonderful people. And I encourage people to do that. But often I find that people are not getting more tools in the toolbox. They're just replacing one for the next. They're just getting the shiny new tool, and that's the one they use for a year. And then they go to another seminar, and then they use that one for a year, and then they use that one for a year. And I've been there too. So I say to people, I want our seminar to be to view it as the toolbox, or our workshop or our work to view it as the toolbox, which helps you understand movement and the person in front of you and helps you decide then what tool you want to pick out, because all the tools are good at the right time for the right person. So I guess that does come back to trying to have a really good understand. I think the BPS model is probably the toolbox in and of itself, and understanding that there is a person there with thoughts, beliefs, emotions, injury histories, training histories, and all of these fears around their injury or their body and all of this stuff. So I think the BPS model is probably a good way to approach that. And for example, like I'll try and use an example for this, like a client example, to help illustrate the point. So I had someone come in recently with again a very bad patellar tendinopathy, and he was a very good athlete, or is a very good athlete, and but he was struggling quite a bit. And he had seen a couple of people that had learned a couple of systems, and they had seen that, okay, you're not flexing your knee very much, so I'm going to do a lot of drills which help encourage you to flex your knee and drop your shin forward and pronate your foot and all of these things. And I think they were putting the idea that, okay, he has knee pain. His mechanics are causing his knee pain. It's very much like this equals this. And I thought it was quite the opposite. And I'm not saying anyone is right or wrong here, but I thought that he's not flexing his knee and he's not dorsiflexing his ankle and pronating his foot because he has knee pain. And that's a different thing. So this is where, for example, you might choose some isometric movements, which just get someone to, there's an analgesic effect that might be associated with just doing a wall sit with a vertical tibia, and you get some nice contraction of the quads, you get some kind of the nervous system or the brain or the gets a chance to like down regulate and chill a little bit, and suddenly this person stands up and he has no problem flexing his knee and dorsiflexing the ankle and pronating his foot. So that's a micro example, but if you were just nailing your colors to the mast on one system, then you would keep thinking that this person can't flex his knee and he is in pain because he's not flexing his knee, but actually he was just in a lot of knee pain, so he won't flex his knee because of that. So I think you have to bring in pain and all of these other things in alongside that. So I definitely haven't given you a good answer there, Rocky. I don't know.
No. Honestly, what you've done is you've just opened up the door to understanding concepts, right? The toolbox is the overall concepts of movement. And if you can understand the logical progression, which is something that I constantly kind of come up with and try to create, but I hit closed doors in my own mind as I'm trying to travel through this. And what I mean by that is like when you're troubleshooting, just like you did, maybe it was the pain that was preventing this from happening, or maybe this was being prevented because of the pain. Yeah, there's a logical thought process that you go through, and that is, I think, where we need to tap into. That's the learning, that's the teaching moment. How is it? Because with like Gary and Chris, I love those guys and I've been with them since 2014. In fact, Gary and I are having a conversation this afternoon. And one of the things I kept coming up with is, okay, what's the logical process? I see that you've gotten to where you need to go. I've seen you start from the skull or from the jaw or from the right hand, and you've managed to follow the trail of breadcrumbs to its root source, seemingly. And I need to understand. I'm longing to understand the thought process that goes there. And fortunately for me, somewhere during the COVID years, that actually took place. And now it's occurring. And I'm sure it occurs in you. But how to verbalize that, like you say, when your students are going, okay, or your staff, like, how did you get that? And you say, I don't know. That's the part that I would love to draw out and really have a deeper conversation about. And I don't know if now is the time or not, but it's something that I'm constantly coming up with.
Yeah.
You know what I
a
mean?
tricky one. Yeah, oh no, 100%. I do know what you mean. This is my biggest struggle in daily life. Not struggle in a bad way, but just figuring out how to get that across to people. And that's ultimately why we have to try and help people and ourselves understand how to think better about problems. Because this is what I do find some of the systems that people teach out there on a surface level, and I can understand why they teach like this. It's almost like an algorithmic approach. Like, if this, then do this. And that doesn't really teach people how to think. And I do think that's a good way of often teaching people in the beginning, but I think you have to start to go a layer deeper or many layers deeper. And that's where the gold often lies, is like, okay, like, how did Gary actually come up with this stuff that he's teaching in the first place? Like, it would be nice to have been a fly on the wall. It would probably be nice for Gary to have been a fly on the wall, watching Gary trying to figure this out. You know, that's what I want to see and try and understand, rather than him just, looking at a foot and saying, okay, their cuboid is stuck. Like, but what are the million things that just happened along the way to you coming up with that answer?
Yes. I'd love that for that to happen. So, okay, obviously anatomy of motion and ETA and PRI. Where are your eyes going these days? What are you pursuing? Aside from parenting books.
What am I pursuing? I am trying to figure out, for the most part, I'm working on my communication a lot these days. That's where I'm currently putting a lot of my time and effort and my energy, is trying to communicate as effectively with my clients as possible, as to, here's why we're doing what we're doing. Here's why I think what you did previously maybe didn't work very well. Not in a, I'm better than the previous person or anything like that. Just in a, Let's understand what you've done previously. Maybe that hasn't worked particularly well, why it might have been good, how it helped us, but how we need to move forward. Why I'm choosing the exercises I am in a very simple way that they can understand, why I think it's helpful, and where we're going to go from here. And that's really where my kind of, I don't want to say art. I think a lot of people talk about the art of coaching, and I say that too, but it's actually much more of a craft, I think, than an art. Art almost sounds like it's just something that you pull out of your ass and it's just there, whereas I think it's a craft that you need to constantly try and build, and communication for me is a huge one at the moment. I think probably more so because we've taken on more staff recently, and I'm trying to make sure that they can communicate well. And for example, not to call our physio Mimi out, but this is a good example. Mimi is German, and she's speaking her second language when she's with us and coaching, right? She's absolutely amazing, but she's speaking her second language, and she has almost perfect English, but the tone of voice often stays the same. And I'd be in the office and I'd be listening to like her coaching a drill. And I'm like, she's coaching it perfect, but you just need to put a bit of flavor on it. The way, for this person, you're coaching a breathing drill. You need to bring your tone down and relax it a little bit and connect with them in that way. For this person, you're doing a plyometric exercise. You need to like maybe start shouting at them a little bit more, or you're doing a maximal isometric push or something like that. You need to bring your tone of voice up and like get a bit of arousal there. So that's where my ear is constantly going at the moment to hear that. And the great thing about Mimi is you only need to tell her something once and she'll pick up on it very quickly.
Dude, that's really interesting, because my mind went to perhaps a drama class, bringing in an acting coach that could, and the reason why is that I think that anyone who is kind of a lead trainer or director of training, who has a staff of trainers, regardless of their experience level, but for those that are less experienced, that is something that, like you say, it's a craft. Whether how do you motivate people? How do you encourage them to get uncomfortable, to do the things they need to do to improve? And we look toward coaches quite often, but what you were just invoking to me was more like we need to kind of pursue a different avenue, something in the theater arts. Maybe I don't know, but that might be something. I'm going to look into that myself, because that would be a nice workshop to bring in for the staff, and just do an acting class, and just can we get those emotions out, and see how the outcome is invoked, or how it is created amongst everyone in the room. I
Yeah.
don't know.
Well, I think you're like, I think you're doing this when you have your podcast. So it's an audio experience. So you have to speak in a certain way that's engaging, and you have to be able to bring your voice up and down for certain topics, or really sit on certain words for longer. I'm not particularly good at that. I can sense that you're very good at that. But I appreciate it. And we don't really, when you listen to a good podcaster, you're not thinking about that, but that's happening in the background. Or when you're having a conversation with someone who's highly engaging, like that's happening in the background. You're only thinking like, this is a great conversation, but that person is definitely able to give you those things. If you ever listen to I'm not a massive Joe Rogan fan, but if you ever see clips of him, like even how he engages with the person that's speaking to him, he's like, wow, like, and he's so animated with his words and his voice and stuff. And I think you can know all the drills and you can know all the stuff to say to your clients, but if you're not engaging and they're not enjoying being around you, and you're not able to convince them, you're not going to be successful. I think that's very simple, to be honest.
So who's the type, if there's a personality type or trait, who are the ones that you struggle with? I know mine. I know the clients that come in that I just, within 5 minutes, I'm going, oh, this is going to be a long session. I don't know how to penetrate this person.
Yeah. I know the answer, but I don't get too many of them anymore. So it's like, Irish men who are finished playing sport basically are going to be sort of like in their 40s or 50s or 60s who have to pretend everything is okay with everything and can't show any emotion. And yeah, you like they could be in a 10 out of 10 pain and they tell you it's fine. Yeah, that feels absolutely fine. But then they'll email you the next day saying like, no, I just had a massive flare up and now I can't walk. You're like, you could have fucking told me, you know. So that's the type of person that I would struggle with. Not because I could do well with them, but it just takes a lot of energy from my side to do that, to be honest. So I don't see too many of those anymore. The good thing about another good reason for people to promote themselves on social media is you can start to get more picky with who you want to work with, and you can just work with the people that you really want to work with. So luckily, I'm kind of at that stage, and it makes my work much more enjoyable.
That's super. This is funny, David, because I was expecting us to each have a skeleton of a foot in our hands, and we're going to be kind of going through the intrinsic ability of the foot and so on. But this has taken on a completely refreshing and different direction that I was anticipating. So I appreciate it even more. Yeah, for me, the individuals that I think I struggle the most with are the ones that do not have a strong introspective kind of ability. They just can't get a sense of what's working, and it's almost a deadpan response where you say, okay, now where do you begin to where do you feel this? I mean, you're doing a movement, so something's got to be working here. Where do you feel this? I don't know. And it's just a short answer. Okay. All right, we're going to try a different tact then. And it's no longer joyful adventure through the forest and exploration. Now you are hacking away with a machete in the densest jungle, and you're making maybe an inch an hour of progress. That's what it feels like to me. And fortunately, I think people have a way of congregating similar-minded individuals. So if I don't get to see maybe one person like that, then they're probably not going to tell too many people. And that's probably why we don't get the people that we struggle with the most. And we get the ones that we enjoy, right?
Yeah, exactly. Those people are interesting because they have often you ask them a question around pain, and they have two things. It's either pain or not pain. Not like, okay, you have knee pain. I just have knee pain. That's it. Well, what about like when you bend your knee this much? Do you have it there versus this much? Do you have it there versus this much? Do you have it there? So there's a whole world of like between just pain and not pain. And that's a world that you want to try and I try and open up with my clients, which is, yeah, like I have pain when I walk. Okay, what part of the footstep do you have pain? Is it when you push off your toes? Is it when you come into mid stance? Is it when you strike? Like let's because maybe this opens up an opportunity for us to work on all these positions where you don't have any pain, and we can start to make some really nice movements happen, and then we can be a little bit more cautious in the movements where you do have pain and just appreciate that a little bit more. But those people that you're describing, they can't feel, I don't know if they can't feel it, but they certainly can't articulate it.
No, it's crazy.
Yeah.
So how big is your staff? How many trainers or physios do you have?
We have me, Alice, Chris, and Mimi, 4 of us.
Oh, that's same size here. And do you do an educational kind of component every week? How do you bring up the knowledge and experience of your staff?
So Mimi's in the gym with me every day. Chris and Alice are online, so they're not with us as much. So for Mimi, she's the newest one. She's been with us about 4 months now, and she has had like by far the fastest acceleration in terms of where she was versus where she is now. And that's just because she sat in basically every session that I did with a client for 3 months probably. While also I just threw her in the deep end. It was like, here's your clients now, figure it out. And then we chat at every time. So I'm just a big practical learner. I like to see people working and understand what they do and ask questions. And that's why every single session that I do, she's currently sitting in on, a little bit less now. And every single session that she does, we will have a conversation with about that afterwards. And I'll just say, I always say, why did you do what you did? Why? Give me, I know there could be 10 reasons why you did that drill, but if you could only choose one main reason, what was it? What's the one main thing you wanted to get from that session? Why did you choose those exercises? What could you have done better? So that's my preferred way of learning and teaching. Then for Chris and Alice, who aren't with us in person as much, we were just trying to catch up as often as possible and discuss. It's usually discussing a client. It's like, here's a client that I'm stuck on, or me saying, here's a client that I'm stuck on. What do you guys think? And I think that's a really nice way of, often that just drives a conversation into lots of other stuff anyway, but I think that's a really good way of for learning, to be honest. And that's how I teach in workshops as well.
So when it comes to assessing or appraising client, patient, athlete, however you want to label this individual that comes and sees you, I mean, what I had, my go-to typical, but I can stray off depending on what is going on, is a static posture assessment, three-dimensional, understanding where their structure is in their resting posture, and then some derivations of gait mechanics, like the motions of the pelvis, the spine, shoulders, skull, and then I'm going to get my hands on their feet and feel how those bones are moving and so on. I do have one of the M cubes, the plantar pressure plates, that I'll put them on. That's more for, I won't say it's more for them, but it gives them an understanding. It gives them something visual to see how are they supporting themselves. And then we just start interviewing the body and go to town. So how does it work for you? What's your kind of path for exploring?
Yeah, so more generically, so you know what, honestly, the more I go on, the more someone walks in and I will ask them a lot of questions first, usually, around like what's going on. And oftentimes you will get answers like, I have this, and they've been told they have this by the previous clinician or the previous coach or whatever. And that's good information, but I want to know, I often ask them, what do you think is going on? And why do you think this is going on? And I think that you end up with a very different answer than what I have this. And that can often give you a lot of nice information. So I like a nice chat first to begin with, very informal, very just like no set questions, but I usually find myself asking similar questions a lot of the time. I like to see how they move their body in more global movements. I'm a huge fan of looking at a toe touch, for example. I really like to look at, they're just standing up, and I like to look at them doing a kind of a global rotation, a side bend where they run one hand down the side of their leg, run the other hand down the side of their leg. I like to look at a squat. I think a squat is very helpful, and I try not to show them any of these movements. I just say, can you show me a squat? Whatever a squat means to you. Some people will stand very wide, feet out, knees out. Some people will go narrow, blah, 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 blah. And then oftentimes like an extension as well, or I'll do a toe touch where they roll down, touch their toes, and then they come back up and kind of extend their spine as they come up. I used to do a lot of the movements that you describe as well, and I still have them in my toolbox that I can pull out when I need to, which is like, we'll isolate a pelvic tilt or a head movement or something like that. I've moved more towards the global stuff because I want to see how you move that area when you're not necessarily just trying to isolate that area, if that makes sense. So
No, totally. Yeah.
I think I really like looking at the toe. I think a toe touch gives you so much information in terms of how they flex their spine, if they flex their spine, how they manage their center of mass when their pelvis has to translate vertically behind them backwards to counterbalance the weight of their head. Like, do they actually do that, or do they just kind of round over like a fishing rod? Do they get length through their hamstrings and their inferior glute? So I think when you start to look at movement in that way, you can often start to see lots of little pieces of information within one global movement. And you still have room to then dive in, like, is that pelvis moving, or can they move that at all? And you can go from there. I also do like to do some passive table tests if I feel the need, like if it's a hip problem or something, I do find it beneficial to say, right, let me check your hip flexion and internal and external rotation, just to see like, okay, is it that you're not moving this, or you actually can't move it there? There's no space whatsoever. But a lot of our sessions are online where people, and we don't always have the ability to do that. And I don't feel like I'm losing anything if I can't do that, to be honest. So yeah, they're my main ones.
No, that's great. I've used Gary Gray's 3D maps, which is accentuation of gait mechanics, global movements too. We've got the STAR excursion balance test, but I use that for, reaching, stepping, rotating, and so on. So yeah, a lot of the same elements, definitely.
Yep.
And most of the time taken up is information gathering, whether it's interviewing the person themselves or their body. And then the last 10 or 15 minutes is actually putting some things together that they can walk away with. Now, I don't know about you, but at the most 3 movements, but that person has to be really dedicated. Normally, I just give one thing, maybe 2. But here's just one thing I want you to practice on, because I find that the compliance level drops drastically with 2 or 3. I forget. I used to give 10 exercises and write them all down for them. And of course, only the most diligent person is going to do that. How many moves would you give as homework, or however you would phrase it, to your people?
Yeah, we have a kind of a diverse population, so we rehab a lot of like professional athletes, elite, truly elite athletes, and so they're getting a program.
Sure.
They're getting a full program, day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5, day 6, day 7, 7 different days, or 3 different days over 7 days, or whatever. And that could be anywhere from 30 minutes a day to 2 hours a day if we're fully looking after their rehab. Because
that's their career. That's what they do for a living,
exactly,
right?
Exactly.
But
And we're making
what
sure
about
that
the other people that are not the athletes, that are perhaps just general population?
Yeah, exactly. So, and even a lot of athletes were given 1, 2, 3 movements too, because they fall into that bucket of injured but not really injured. I can still kind of play, which is like 80% of the athletes in the world are in that bucket. So we're not giving them a full program, or they don't have time or the energy or the resources to do that. They're doing a couple of things that make them feel a little bit better so that they can go and play a little bit better. So yeah, with most people where we're just trying to solve like one specific problem and just make them feel a little better, it will be, I usually land on the 3 movement type of thing. I'm kind of a fan of that because I like to hedge my bets a little bit, which is, okay, if I give you the 1 movement and that 1 movement doesn't have as big of impact as I would have liked, then I'm almost left with nothing. If I can give you 2 or 3 movements, I'm hedging my bets a little bit, but it's still just little enough so that I can actually know what's having an impact or what's working and what's not working. I also like to give people a little menu, and I find that can be very helpful, where it's like, okay, every day I want you to definitely do this and this, these 2 movements. Not too much, it'll take 5 minutes or less. But there's also a menu, which is, here's 3 other movements that I think would be very helpful for you. You can either choose to do 1, 2, or 3 of those movements, or you can mix it up on a daily basis, but do not feel guilty whatsoever if you do not do those movements. If you miss those today, I don't care. Because a lot of people, if you give them 5 things, they'll say, well, I'm not going to do 5, so I'll do 0. So I like to say, here's 1 or 2, and then here's an optional 1 or 2 or 3 if you feel like on that day you want to do a little bit more. So that's
I like
kind of
that.
where we are.
Yeah, I like giving them options. So if you feel like if you got more time in your hands, this is feeling good, have at it. But if you've only got a few minutes in your day, hit this 1 or 2 moves at least. Try and get it. So, David, the time flies by faster than I realize. David Gray Rehab, DGR, for listening audience who are yet familiar with you, how can they learn more? And opportunity to kind of talk about a little bit of the products that you offer in terms of online education.
I think a good place to go, Rocky, is our podcast. I've learned recently that when you're on someone else's podcast, you should you should drop the name of your own podcast, because you're talking to podcast listeners. So our podcast is called the David Gray Rehab Podcast, which is not very original, but I'm not good at naming things, to be honest. So yeah, it's GREY, and we just have I've done loads of solo episodes, I've done loads of guest episodes, and just talking about random different stuff, all about movement and business and the whole industry and that. And our Instagram is probably the other place where you can visually see some of the exercises we use with clients and so on. And that's just our Instagram account is David Gray Rehab. And yeah, I won't go promoting our programs, I don't think, just because I think people should go and check out either our podcast or our Instagram first. No one's going to probably buy something from one conversation. They usually, I've learned from marketing as well, you need something like 6 touch points or something like that. So go and go and watch a few posts, and then either decide I hate this guy, or maybe I'm interested in learning a bit more.
In 2025, are you coming back to the States at all?
I hope so. Yeah. That's the plan. I got a little bit pooped from traveling and teaching, to be honest. I got a little bit just fatigued from it. I got a little bit of not very healthy from it. I didn't do travel very well. I wasn't doing my training. I wasn't eating. I wasn't sleeping well. Just lots of things. And then obviously when our baby came along, I couldn't do as much of that. So hopefully we'll be back on the workshop tour again next year.
Right on. Well, I look forward to that.
And that's it for this episode of the Zealous Podcast. Thank you, David, for coming on and sharing all your wisdom and experience. Remember, Setanta College is the place to go for your Masters of Science. You just enter RS10, get 10% off tuition today. Go to rockysnyder.com for your educational needs as well. Continuing education, that is. November 3rd, posture-based soft tissue mobilization workshop happening in Santa Cruz. Find out more by rockysnyder.com. Follow us on Instagram at Rocky_Snyder. Hey, pick out a copy of my book, Return to Center, while you're at it. I don't talk much about it, but it's out there. We'll see you next week.